doing it. And it's just because at the end of the day, we're here to, our company exists to create value for users, and a coin didn't make the experience any better. And that was, we just wanted to create the best possible experience, and it was just one more piece of friction and one more complication for the product. And we knew we could make the product that was financially sustainable without having to attach its own economy to it. The next thing that was kind of crazy was talking to the securities regulators. I don't know how many games there are out there that require someone to go through KYC in order to play them. But CryptoKitties, indirectly does, because in order to buy Ether, in most places you have to do KYC. In order to buy a cat, you have to have Ether. And so we wanted to be on side. We wanted to be good corporate citizens. And so we talked to the Securities Commission of British Columbia, and we said, hey, we're building this new blockchain experience, and we want to have guidance from you and make sure that we're not running afoul of securities laws. So the regulators were just starting to get a handle on ICOs at that point in time. Like, they were clearly a little bit behind on what an ICO was, and it could be argued that they still aren't quite entirely sure where it falls inside the law, even today. But back then, they were just starting to get a handle on things. But CryptoKitties really threw them for a loop. I remember, getting questions from the auditor that we were talking to, and he's like, okay, well, when is your token generation event? And I'm like, well, we don't really have a token generation event. We have births, and it pretty much happens whenever anyone wants it to. He's like, well, but what's your hard cap? Like, every token has to have a hard cap. I'm like, no hard cap. As long as there's people who want to breed more cats, they can make more cats. But don't worry, every one of them is different. He's like, what? So there was a lot of back and forth, but in the end, I think we were the first project in Canada that got informal guidance from a formal securities regulation authority that our token was not a security. So you can safely buy kitties without worries. And it's also generally deemed to be true in the United States. Gary Gensler, the former head of the CFTC, the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission here in the United States, up on stage, sort of said that in his opinion, after he left office, but in his opinion, CryptoKitties were not a security. I actually met Gary at an event a couple months after he gave that speech, and I gave him one of these lapel pins, and I swear no one has been happier than Gary to get one of these pins. He's a big fan of ours. The other thing that was interesting is that compared to other crypto experiences, we were not driven by ideology. We were driven by creating something that people wanted. We were not, and we didn't want to try and make people understand what we're doing by, resorting to FAQs or Medium posts, right? We wanted people to come in and have it be obvious the way a game is obvious. And so it was really important that we put a lot of effort, and fortunately, we have an amazing UX team that worked on it. Just make it very smooth onboarding, assuming you have the Ether. And then the other thing that was really critically important for CryptoKitties' success, and hopefully it's reflected on the slide, is just the appeal of the kitty art. The fact of the matter is that it's great to create an asset that people truly own. But you have to want people to actually own it. Like, people have to want to own it in order for that to be meaningful. And so I think the team led by Gile, who created the art direction, who drew 100% of the art for the first batch of cats, really deserves a lot of credit for that.
And also the communications team, because I think at that time there was so much jargon in this space and so many words that didn't make sense to the average person. And we really took that out. We actually replaced as much as we could with cat puns. And that's what really caught people's attention, kept them enticed in the game. So before we actually launched, we attended ETH Waterloo, which at that time was the world's largest hackathon for Ethereum developers, coming together and hacking to build a product within 3 days. And most people think that we actually launched, or we created it while we were at ETH Waterloo, but in reality, we had only given ourselves about a 3-month window to build the game and launch it. But we really actually just launched our alpha at ETH Waterloo. It was so popular that we didn't actually have tickets to get into ETH Waterloo. We just bought a couple plane tickets and showed up and hoped that maybe we could talk our way into the competition. And we actually ended up building a tool, an analytics tool for blockchain called Rufflet, which ended up winning the whole hackathon, which gave us a presence on stage to actually talk about CryptoKitties as well. And you don't know how people are going to receive it. You don't know what people's interpretation of the game would be. So we went there really just to get people's insights, see what was working, the first idea of the game, and figure out what do we need to change, what wasn't working, what could work. And we had a few simple growth tactics, as you can see from some of the images here. Whereas most people, if you've been to hackathons before, show up in a lot of black clothing and hoodies. We had crazy tie-dyed shirts with cats on them. We stuck these puns we had puns with stickers and threw them up all over the hackathon. So if you were entering the washroom, you'd see a cat pun. And then there was links to go and check out CryptoKitties.co, which on the last slide was actually just live streams of cat rescue videos. And there was a whole bunch of riddles throughout the live stream itself, and if you could figure out all the riddles, you would actually earn a Gen 0 of a cat. And that really sparked a lot of attention for CryptoKitties. We had balloons, and we really were just wanting people to talk to us and come and try out the game. And it was incredible to see that in less than like 24 hours, how many cats were being bred by on Rigby network, so just on a test network, and how enthralled people were. And it really gave us the confidence that, okay, we needed a couple more changes to make, but we were going to be ready to launch. But the last step, actually, before we were able to launch, was creating a bug bounty. For those of you who aren't familiar with the bug bounty, it is the idea of getting developers together from outside of your team or outside of your organization to really go over your code and make sure that it's written with the way that you intended it to be written, that the logic matches. And blockchain, as mentioned earlier, it's unforgiving. The rules are set from the beginning and you can't change them. So for us, it was really making sure that the logic had matched. And so at that time, as Dieter had mentioned, the ICO Craze was going on, and I was personally in charge of our bug bounty. And I think all of us have maybe an experience where you're trying to creep someone on Facebook or Instagram and you're starting to learn stuff about them. Imagine doing that with just GitHub handles. So these people don't want to be found. Really, they just want to write good code. And so I was out there creeping their handles, trying to find an email address, a phone number, or something, because at that time there were so few Solidity developers, which was the language that it was written in. But I managed to find some really amazing, talented engineers like Nick Johnson here. And part of the bug bounty was actually you always provide a monetary reward for the top contributors who find the most bugs. Nick was one of our winners there, and on top of the monetary reward, we actually gave people the bug cat, as you can see there. So there's only 3 of them. And something that Nick did that was incredible, again, at this time when ICOs were a big thing and there was scams and there was a lot of doubt in the industry, and it didn't have a good impression. But you found someone like Nick who actually ended up taking his bug cat and donating all of the profits that he made from it to World Builders, a charity that actually supports people in developing countries with training in agriculture to help get their families restarted. So with his proceeds, he ended up raising about $75,000, and that was the equivalent of 150 cows, which went to 150 families for them to get a new start. And I just have to say, as something that, how poor that industry was at that time, that it was amazing to see people like Nick existed, and I think that deserves a round of applause.
So that was actually the beginning of a beautiful relationship, actually. So Nick Johnson is very influential in the Ethereum community. We loved his contributions here. We loved what he did with the Bugcat. And so he actually now works with us as an advisor on some of our internal projects, and so I get to have a call with him every couple of weeks, which is a highlight of my time. So we accidentally melted the world computer. So I don't know how many of you know this. So one of the early slogans for Ethereum was the world computer, and so and that's a very aspirational title, and I like it. I like this idea that there is a computer that exists that anyone can use, that no one owns, and that's certainly the goal of the Ethereum network. And so when we were building CryptoKitties, and everyone else was raising hundreds of millions of dollars to disrupt the real estate market and to completely change the world of finance and to bank the unbanked, it never actually occurred to us that a funny little cat game would overwhelm the network. But it did. In December, a week after we launched, we represented more than a quarter of the transactions on the Ethereum network. We represented about half of the power of the Ethereum network, because obviously our transactions are a little bit more complicated than just sending tokens around. And the price of gas, the price of the transaction costs of interacting with the network went up by a factor of 100. And it was terrible. It was a terrible experience. There were so many people who were angry at us because they wanted to do their ICOs, and we had melted the network. We lost users, right? Like many people, were learning about CryptoKitties and wanted to come and play it, and they couldn't. And we did some analysis after the fact, and there were people waiting as long as a week for their transactions to be processed by the network because it was so congested. So that was a really eye-opening moment, and it actually, I don't think it was ever formally acknowledged, but about a month after CryptoKitties was released, the Ethereum Foundation announced that 2018 was going to be the year of scaling, because that was their highest priority, and I like to think that they were thinking about our next game. So that was a really eye-opening moment. The other thing that was like crazy surprising to me that I don't think anyone on our team expected before we launched was the enthusiasm to build on top of CryptoKitties. So I wasn't surprised to see people putting up web pages that trying to analyze how our breeding algorithm worked and predict what the probabilities of certain combinations of traits were when you bred two cats together. That's really common when you have sort of these kinds of games. I wasn't surprised that people ran sort of news sites and there was a Discord involved in discussion. What surprised me was things like kitty racing. So we've got an animation there from kitty racing. Kitty racing is a blockchain game. You go to their smart contract. You have to have a cat. You have to have one of our CryptoKitties. You enter it into the race, and as many as 4 other people are entered into the race at the same time, and then you race around the little track there, and someone wins the race. And the fact of the matter is that the people who made this weren't huge fans of CryptoKitties. They like CryptoKitties, but they weren't out to build something for CryptoKitties. They were out to build a different kind of blockchain game, and they wanted to build a fun little racing game. It was just an MVP for them. And where was the community? Where were the people who had already shown an interest in playing games on blockchain? And the answer was they were in CryptoKitties. So if you make a racing game for CryptoKitties, you have a built-in audience. You have people who are already have proven desire to buy into this thing. And we've had a bunch of different projects. There's a team called Kitty Hats that lets you put hats on your cats. My favorite thing about kitty hats is that it's the cat that owns the hat. So once you put a beret on your kitty, that beret is there to stay. And if you sell the cat, well, the hat goes with it.
There's over about 50 projects, actually. And you can imagine just the stuff that comes out even with the nature of the game. I think the funniest one I ever heard was a group of university students at a hackathon came up with Kitty Tinder. So you can just imagine the type of games that all come from this. And it's been incredible to see how that momentum in that community is just continuing and new games will come.
Yeah, and this idea of modding games is not that unusual. But typically when you think about modding games, you think about injecting code into the game or changing the game in some way. And obviously with a blockchain game, we can't even change the game, let alone somebody else. But what these experiences do is they layer more functionality on top of our game. And there's this, because of the nature of blockchain and smart contracts and the fact that the rules are enforced by the shared network, we can't stop them from building on top of our thing, but they can't ever break our game, right? So they can't break our rules any more than we can, any more than anyone else can. But we can't block them from doing it. And this is incredible to me because anybody who's been in sort of the technology VC world may have heard the term platform risk, and that's the idea that if you're building a piece of software that depends on somebody else's software, and you become too competitive with them, if you become too successful, they can just cut you off at the knees, right? I mean, the most famous example is Twitter, right? So Twitter basically rose to prominence through the influence of third-party Twitter apps that provided a better UI than Twitter did itself, and then they just shut it down. And now it's virtually impossible to make money on a third-party Twitter app because Twitter has very strict limits on how many users you can have. We didn't authorize kitty racing. We didn't create an API for kitty racing. We didn't even know kitty racing was coming until it was already launched. And after the fact, we couldn't shut them down in any way, shape, or form. And that's amazing to me, and I think it has the potential to change how software is written.
But when we're looking towards the future, there's a few things that come to mind for us of what really will bring mainstream adoption. I think with CryptoKitties, it was a new experience. At that time, everything was, at blockchain was just talking about finance. And really, in order for this technology to really see its adoption, it needs more interesting things to do. The UX needs to be so much stronger. You shouldn't have to go through 25 different steps in order to buy a cat for a game. We need to simplify the mechanics and make it easier and accessible for the average consumer, because we won't really see mainstream adoption until that's truly possible. And the last part is the capacity. As we mentioned, there was numerous scaling issues with us launching on Ethereum. And so it's amazing to see all of the blockchains that are out there today and all of the side chains that are existing and everything that's trying to figure out how to scale this. Because if a cat came with 10,000 users, I think only at one point broke it, scaling really is the most important thing in order for us to actually see adoption. And so as a result of this, and as a result of CryptoKitties, we've created Dapper Labs. Our goal with Dapper Labs is to bring 1 billion people to the blockchain. We use the power of play to deliver blockchain-based experiences, and we want the world to see them.
So, we learned a lot building CryptoKitties. I think we have a really unusual perspective about what blockchain means, what blockchain can mean. And I want to talk about that a little bit here. So I came up with this idea a little while ago that blockchain represents the next logical step in 3 very significant technological trends. But whenever I tell people this, they always think I'm being crazy. They always assume that I've drunk too much of my own Kool-Aid, and obviously that could be true. But I feel like in this room we can go through it, because I think that all of the things that I'm about to say are direct results of things that we experienced in CryptoKitties and some of the stories that we were able to just tell you. So, what is the future of blockchain? So I think the first trend that I'm barely old enough to remember was just this notion of digital things. When computers became widespread, the nature of digital things, digital data, was completely different from the physical world. It used to be that a spreadsheet was a physical piece of paper that was the size of a desk with a bunch of little grid lines drawn on it. And my dad actually used to do accounting on a physical spreadsheet, and he would sit down with a pencil and he would write in all the numbers on the ledger, and if there was a mistake, he would have to go back and find where the mistake was. And you know, this all sounds like, well, you know, yay, computers, but I think the transformational thing that happened was it used to be the effort of many people just to figure out what had happened in the business and put that in a physical spreadsheet. With the advent of digital spreadsheets, suddenly the computer was doing all the math. You could make an infinite number of copies of that data. And instead of figuring out what had happened with the business, you could start to use this digital spreadsheet to figure out what could happen with the business. What if we were able to cut this cost by 10%? What would that do to every other number on that spreadsheet? And that completely changed the way business worked. That completely changed the way financing of businesses work. And you know, all sorts of other industries were completely transformed, right? There used to be, you'd buy physical magazines, and now we go to websites. The media landscape is completely different. You know, like it used to be that there was a company called Time, and it was one of the most powerful companies in the world because it owned the publishing empire, and now people kind of remember it as this like thing that had a lot of cool pictures. And the reason that computers changed all this is because digital objects are infinitely copyable and infinitely malleable. But I think what we're starting to realize now in the world is that that has a downside too. Having a digital thing doesn't mean very much. Having a copy of a picture, having an image, a JPEG of the Mona Lisa doesn't mean anything. Having a physical, you know, Da Vinci artifact means a lot, and we see it. But the digital one, there's nothing like that. And blockchain lets us bring back some of the things we lost in the move from the physical world to the digital world. It brings some of those things to the digital world without getting rid of some of the awesome things about the digital world, right? So baseball cards and CryptoKitties, Beanie Babies and CryptoKitties, those are easy analogies to make, but you know what you can't do with a baseball card? You can't breed two players together and get a third player that no one has ever seen before. And so we get to combine the best of the digital world with the best of the physical world, and we can start to have things like scarcity, like ownership, like the signaling, right? Like the future, you know, the future Air Jordans, right? The future, you know, Nike t-shirt that everyone wants to own to signal that they're a part of a particular tribe, that may be digital. And I think that blockchain is like a really important step in sort of bringing back the best of the physical world and combining with the best of the digital world. The next trend is the trend that the internet brought, which is the instant transformation of information. I remember when I was in college and I had access to the internet, and my parents were like, show me this internet thing. And I showed them a bunch of stuff on the internet, but the one thing that they didn't get most of it, but the one thing they got was email, and everybody got email. And I happen to think that digital money is the equivalent to blockchain of what email was to the internet. If you go to anybody who grew up with the internet and ask them what's cool about the internet, no one's gonna say email, right? They're gonna talk about how Tinder is so cool, they're gonna talk about Netflix, they're gonna talk about Twitter. But guess what? Every one of those things that is cool needs email. You can't sign up for Facebook without an email address. Email is the base layer of the internet. I think that the ability to transfer money will always be a part of blockchains, but I think that 10 years from now, when you ask people what's awesome about blockchain, they're not gonna say money, right? Everyone will know that you can move money on a blockchain, but no one will think that that's the cool thing about blockchain. And you know, when you look at CryptoKitties, the fact that value, that we couldn't take the transfer of value out of CryptoKitties, we embraced it, but we couldn't have taken it out really if we wanted to. It led to things like, you know, Nick being able to give 150 people a sustainable food source. And a big part of what people love about their cats is that they are meaningfully tradable, right? That word value, right? I think a lot of us, especially in the blockchain conference, associate that with financial value, but value is what matters to people. And having the ability to transfer what matters to you over a digital network, I think is a huge transformational effect. And then the third one is the most subtle, and if you're not a software engineer, it might be the hardest to understand. But I think that this new way of letting software talk to software that the example from kitty hats and kitty racing is really going to be transformational. So, beginning, you used to own your own computer. You would buy a piece of software, Microsoft Word, Adobe Photoshop. You would run it on your own computer, and that was this first wave of software. And then the internet came about, and sort of two things happened at the same time, and I think those two things are highly related, and that's the rise of open source and the rise of software as a service. A kid can create something with 90% of the functionality of Facebook in a weekend using open source software. The ability to take software, right? Like it used to be, something like Microsoft Word, 80–90% of that code was written explicitly by Microsoft employees, explicitly for Word, right? A modern piece of software, CryptoKitties, for example, right? 80–90% of the software, the code that runs CryptoKitties, was written by somebody else that we downloaded for free as part of an open source project. But where is the value now? The value is in services. The value is in, I can go to Facebook and I can download React, their front-end development framework. I can download all sorts of infrastructure tools that they've built. They freely allow me those. You know what I can't download? My own data. Because that's where their value is. The value is in the services. And what blockchain does is it lets you move those services into an open environment where anyone can access them and no one can block anyone from using them. And so, I hate to use the example of, I hate to use an example that exists today, because I don't want people to think that what's awesome about blockchain is that we can move Twitter to the blockchain. I don't think that's going to be awesome. I think that Twitter is what Twitter is, and what is created on the blockchain and is awesome on the blockchain will be something that we can't imagine yet, in the same way that we couldn't imagine Twitter, 5 years before Twitter came out. But that problem with Twitter being able to cut off third-party application developers and to basically, take from that community, and then when it stops serving them, block that community, is something that can't happen in blockchain. Or at least it's very difficult to make. You have to do extra work to block people in blockchain, and I don't think people like that. And so I think this ability for these services to go from closed services like Facebook and LinkedIn and into open services where anyone can combine them in any way is going to be as transformational as the movement from desktop software to software as a service was. Even though I don't know what that's going to be, right? Like the day the iPhone was launched, I don't think if you told anyone, man, this is going to completely change how you go on vacation, people will be like, what are you talking about? And you say, no, Uber, Airbnb, they're coming, right? No one would have imagined that when the iPhone was launched, and yet that's what's coming on, I believe, on blockchain. I think we have time for some questions. If you wouldn't mind starting with your name, and then we'd have to get to a question.
Sure thing. This is fun. I'll just speak up. I'm Shirish. Oh, there you go. I'm Shirish from Xerox PARC. I'm a design technologist there. So it might be a little complicated question, but I'll try my best. So I see 4 dimensions in any blockchain, and specifically in CryptoKitties. Is one that it's very similar to hardware design as opposed to software design, where the philosophy of better than perfect does not apply. If you made it and it's out there for good. The second dimension would be the smart contract idea, where there is no interference from a human being. It's almost autonomous in its own self. I mean, I'm not saying that they're AI, but the interaction with human beings isn't there. And the third part being the artificial scarcity, which I think CryptoKitties demonstrated pretty vividly. And the last place would be there is no hierarchical control. So in that space, do you think there is, or what are your thoughts on the ethics of a developer? Because there's still a very small amount of community that are developing these things. And the idea of experimenting with them has a little burden on it, because you cannot just put out a contract and not deal with the consequences, because you can't change them. At the same time, you have to balance out the well, the democracy of the internet, where you don't want to harass the control. So I was just thinking if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is, and I thought you were kind of going there that way explicitly, but you know, we made some trade-offs with CryptoKitties, right? CryptoKitties is not a completely autonomous experience, and there was a conscious choice, and it was a choice for a couple of reasons. One, it had to be fun. We wanted it to be a fun game, and so you know, even though 96% of the cats were bred by users, we had a very deliberate strategy for releasing new cats progressively over the course of a year. And as time went on, we would release more and more new traits, right? It was a way to, like, you know, a game where all of the content is available on day one isn't as interesting as a game where you can dribble that out. The only way we can do that is if we have knowledge that other people don't have, which is inherently not decentralized. Having said that, we were very careful to make sure that the ownership of the cats, the ability to transfer and sell the cats, wasn't tied to us in any way. Right? And so what we were trying to do was get the best value from both sides. And I think that in the long run, that's how it's going to be. I think that, you know, we need to make sure that we're using decentralization and you know, those 4 axes you mentioned are a great way of thinking about it. And we need to go as far as we can without, like, ruining what that core experience is. And I think sometimes it's not obvious how to go farther, and certainly when I talk to, you know, other people in the industry, other people coming to the industry, I think is a better way of putting that. There's a lot of reticence from existing businesses. They're like, oh, well, we can go this far. I'm like, yeah, you can actually go twice as far. And they're like, ooh, but that makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm like, yeah, but what you're doing is you are releasing value. Yes, and I know that's why it makes you nervous, but where is that value going to? It's going to your users. And I genuinely believe that the more value you give to your users, the more value they'll give to you and your project. And people are going to gravitate to the experiences that give them the most value. So great, right? Like, hold on to that thing, but if somebody else comes along and they're willing to release that, then they're gonna beat you in the market.
Thank you.
And I'm really interested with the last piece that you spoke about in regards to where we're going, and sort of the concept of open source and the ability to build upon what other people have done. And I'm wondering, I don't know the answer to this, but the enterprise Ethereum group or whatever alliance I think it's called, will they have the ability to block that when they create solutions, or what would be the interconnection between, you know, the Ethereum blockchain, the smart contracts that are being placed out there, and then the ability to build upon or leverage stuff that's been built and put on the blockchain by the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance? Thank you.
Yeah. Did you want to jump in on this one? So I think what's interesting is that word blockchain can refer to 2 things. It can refer to technology, a data structure, and it can refer to a decentralized computation environment. And when I'm talking about it in this presentation, I'm explicitly talking about that second thing. I'm talking about functionally a computer that anyone can use, that no one controls. You can use blockchain technology to build things that people do control. And there are interesting use cases for that, and that's why the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, or Enterprise whatever, exists. And because sometimes you have 5 companies that want to do work together, they don't necessarily trust each other, but they do business together. And having a shared data source that only they can see makes a ton of value. Now, if those 5 people decide to shut that blockchain down, or they decide to, like, change the contents of that blockchain or change the rules, that's fine, because that blockchain was built for them. What I think is transformational is when we have a public open blockchain that has the capacity to literally allow 1 billion people to use it, but which no one controls. That's where I think things get kind of crazy and interesting.
So they have a fork, like the Enterprise Alliance, they're generally dealing with forks of the Ethereum blockchain?
I believe the term that the industry is starting to use is spoon. So it's the same code. It's the same code, it's the same technology, but it's a completely different state space. So when the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance runs a blockchain, there are no cats on that blockchain, right? Yeah.
Hey, my name's Taylor. I had 2 questions. Where's the animation come from? Who's drawing, creating the pictures we see, the CryptoKitties? And the second question, who are your competitors? What's the industry like in collectible digital goods?
So the images and the pictures all started originally from Gile, who's an in-house artist, obviously very talented. And now we actually have a whole team of designers that are continuing to draw all of like animations and cats.
And the same person was competitor. Yeah, I mean, after we launched and had a bunch of success, there were a bunch of people who I would call competitors who basically just, some of them like literally
copycats, if you will.
Yeah, other people literally ripped off our idea, just basically like, we're doing llamas instead of cats, so it's all new. Like, none of those really went anywhere. There are other people doing games on blockchain, but I don't think of those as competitive. Right? Like, I think of those as the other members of our community. We recently did a collaboration with an upcoming game called Gods on Chain. Yeah, right? So Gods on Chain is a sort of a Magic style card game where the cards are all tracked on chain. And we had an awesome thing where you could take your kitties and lock them into a card and they become cards in the game. So that's like, we're not competitors, right? Like lots of people who are into Gods on Chain, are into CryptoKitties too, and there's no reason why we have to think of each other as competitors. But there's definitely other people in the gaming space who are very excited about this stuff, and I'm excited about some of their stuff too.
Thanks.
Elise Sue, I work at a blockchain startup called Credits in Sydney. Thanks for your talk. I just wanted to say CryptoKitties are really fun, but what is your ultimate goal or purpose of CryptoKitties? Is it to test a particular concept, like for example, tokenization of real world assets?
CryptoKitties was our first exploration into how we could create value using blockchain.
We actually had a lot of companies. At that time, we were Axiom Zen, and so a lot of that work was clients in real estate, finance, and insurance, and coming to us trying to figure out what is this technology and what does it mean for them. And we always struggled with how to explain the technology in a way that made sense to them. And we started to realize that the average consumer would never adopt this technology if it wasn't usable and if it didn't make sense to them. So that's actually where CryptoKitties was born, with the idea of getting users to actually experience the value firsthand. And so as a company, that value or that original belief actually still stands. We want people to experience and actually adopt this technology because we think it has so much more potential than what we're even seeing today. So for us, it's all about the experiences, how to use it, the actual usability.
The parent company Axiom Zen continues to investigate sort of industrial uses or commercial uses of blockchain. Dapper is all about consumer use cases. As we said at the beginning, like gaming is 100% our first goal because games are approachable. New technology is scary, games aren't, and somehow when you mix new technology and games together, it's the not scariness of the games that dominates. And so it's just a really great way to get people in and understand what this stuff is about. Our belief, our genuine belief is that when people come in and they're playing these games and they're like, wait a minute, I have full control over my digital assets in my game. Why don't I have full control over my digital assets in these other things, right? Why isn't my insurance and my real estate more like this game? And that's when we'll start to see, I think, people, when it starts to make sense to build other consumer use cases.
Same for replace CryptoKitties with individuals, everything that makes us feel our identity. Seeing what High Fidelity is doing in the immersive tech and how we're going to create a digital twin of ourselves online. How do you see that play out when we're becoming more and more sort of merged with that online experience?
I'm always really skeptical about blockchain use cases that have direct analogs in the real world. So when we were looking at real estate, one of the obvious answers is, well, let's put like ownership, let's put deeds on the blockchain, right? And that has a lot of appeal. But I always ask the question, okay, let's say your house's deed is on the blockchain, and that is how you prove that you own your house. You lose your private keys. All right, I don't know about you, but I've done it. And now you can't prove that you own that house anymore. So you can't sell it. Probably you can't legally live in it. No one's probably going to stop you. But when you're gone, what? For the rest of humanity, no one else can live in that house. No one else can own that plot of land. That's a bonkers idea. So if my identity is on the blockchain, that may be very useful, but it has to be tied into something. Somehow we need to understand that recoverability part. And so, I think as humans, we just sort of assume that I'll just go to the office. I'll talk to the agent, and they'll figure, like, blockchain doesn't have that. And so I think that's a solvable problem. I think we'll solve it. But I think we have to be very cautious about people who are promising to put indelible information on blockchains before that problem is solved. Because I think that invariably it ends up being a source of information and not a source of truth. So if I can go to my city hall and say, oh, I lost my keys, can you print me a new deed to this new thing? Well, then the blockchain is no longer the source of truth. City hall is a source of truth. And blockchain is a useful information source for that source of truth. That's great, but we haven't actually gotten rid of city hall, which is what a lot of people are sort of promising with this. So I think it's going to come, but I think we have to be careful not to forget the limitations of the technology when we're looking at the value it can provide.
Hi. Well, first of all, I'm John Walpert. I work for Joe Lubin and the Consensus team running Web3 Studio, which isn't a lot different from the original team you guys had. We were looking for new innovative uses. We want to thank you, because without CryptoKitties, we would have been launched last night, the bootleg token, which one reporter called if CryptoKitties married live performance videos. But I won't go to that. The question I have, coming from help found Hyperledger Fabric and that sort of thing, people ask, well, are you a Fabric person or an Ethereum person? I'm like, no, I'm a stateful internet person. Right? So CryptoKitties broke Ethereum. You must be thinking about how there will be no ledger that can achieve the stateful internet, right? We can't put all transactions on one ledger. What we need to have is billions of n-lateral state machines that are coordinated in an internet of blockchain-ness. So I wonder, what are you guys doing about that? Are you looking at sort of coordinated state on a mainnet and then using pinning contracts to coordinate n-lateral trading? How are you looking at that kind of? There's scalability, but we'll never get to scalability like that, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who talk about stuff. It's a really funny industry because people talk about ideas as though they exist already. When we launched CryptoKitties, people are like, you guys are crazy, why didn't you build this on a plasma chain? And I was like, oh, plasma chain, never heard of that. Well, it turned out at that point in time, it was literally a blog post from Vitalik. And as far as I know, there still isn't a plasma chain in existence now, right, a year and a half later. So there are some really amazing ideas. I love state channels. I think that L4's counterfactual state channels, I haven't looked at their code yet, but I met those guys and their ideas make a ton of sense to me. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think things like plasma chains are less interesting. But obviously there's a sliding scale. You can imagine you can call a state channel a plasma chain just by the number of participants in it and how long it lives. So they're very similar. But fundamentally, I think that I genuinely believe that there will be sort of one core chain, and that there will be some chains around that.
Sort of a root coordinating chain.
Yeah, I don't know whether you want to call it a coordinating chain or think about it as the internet, right? Like, we all talk to the same internet, but when I want to copy a file from my computer to Kim's computer, I try and do it over the exactly what we're trying to do, right? When you talked, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to Juan, the founder of Filecoin, but it's very, very interesting because I tend to think of this as like, okay, we need a really high capacity middle hub chain that everyone can access, but that people will from time to time go off of that chain and do things with state channels and whatnot. He sort of goes the other way and he's like, for the most part, people are one-to-one in, right? I create a network with you, we do a bunch of stuff that's trustful, and then we can upload it to the chain. Either way, we need a better layer one. Because even if we put CryptoKitties on a sidechain or something like that, all the ether would need to come in, all the ether needed to go out, and maybe we could have 10 or 100x the number of people we had, but we're not anywhere near a billion.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ian. I was just wondering in regards to I know you say that it's the fact that the kitties, it becomes the property of the purchaser and it's theirs forever and so on. The artwork still is the property of X and Zen. And so I know the easy answer, in case something were to happen to that artwork, revoke a license, whatever, I know the easy answer is just that people can just recreate the artwork however they like and they still retain the cat. But what would be, I guess, the continuing value for, say, the cats that are celebrity-based, or where that artwork cannot just be recreated? You still retain the cat and the non-fungible token, but you can't carry on the artwork from that, and you can't reproduce the artwork on your own either, because it's like a celebrity, for example. So what would be the value going forward in case something would happen to artwork?
So, I don't know how many people, I think most people have heard of the GPL, they know about open source. What I think a lot of people don't understand, and don't worry, I'll get to your question. What a lot of people don't understand is that the reason that GPL works is because the authors of open source software do not give up their copyright, right? The reason that they're able to say, you can use my software, but if you make any changes to it, you have to share those changes, is because they haven't given up ownership. And that's what we modeled the NFT license after. So when you buy a cat, we don't give you the art. And the reason we don't give you the art is because some of your art is in her cat, right? And think of it from her perspective. Does she want you to own her art, right? If we give you ownership of the art and then you go and sell that token to somebody else, there's no rule, there's no legal reason why you have to transfer the art with the token. By keeping the ownership, by keeping the copyright with us and writing a license in the style of the GPL, we can say, look, whoever owns that token has a license to the art, right? If you own a cat and you have a license to that art, you can do all sorts of stuff with that. You can even make money as long as you don't go over a particular limit. And that's great, go ahead and do that. And it's funny when you go through the terms and you're like, oh man, I can't use the art in this way and that way and the other thing. You need to think in terms of not what limits are we putting on you, but what limits are we putting on other people. So one of the things that we like to say in NFT licenses is, well, you shouldn't put the art on a website that doesn't verify that you own the token. You're like, well, there's no websites that verify my token. So, and obviously we're not going to actually sue anybody, you just puts it up on their personal webpage. But what about somebody who creates a website that looks like it's selling your cat, but you haven't actually put your cat up for sale? How do we go after them if we don't own that art? And we can't say, no, you don't have a license, he has a license. And if he does put his token up for sale on your website, then you do have a license, right? And that's how we are able to do that. So that's the question of like, why haven't we given up the copyright? It's because without that, we don't have any ability to block anyone from doing anything. And we want the owners of the cats to have that ownership, feel that ownership. The second question of what happens to the art if we go away, well, when we launched, the technology didn't really exist to store that data in a decentralized way. It could be argued it still doesn't really exist. I mentioned talking to Filecoin before, they have an amazing technology called IPFS. We have been working with IPFS for like over a year now, looking at it, what's the best way to put that data in there. And it is absolutely our goal to make sure that all of the that there's the token, and then there's a bunch of things that are associated with the cat, it's description, it's art, it's badges that aren't on the blockchain because it's just too expensive to store that stuff there. That stuff makes sense to put that in IPFS and then store the hash of that in the blockchain. And so there's an irrevocable link between those two things.
Thank you. Let's go to the last slide.
Everyone asks us what we are up to and what our next projects are. We do have a number of products coming out, but one that I am allowed to briefly talk about is Dapper. So if you go to meetdapper.com, we do have a private beta for a new product coming out, so you can sign up and try our waitlist and get on the wait list. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.